VisualPolitik community. There's a word starting to circulate in the upper echelons of the Kremlin. A word that terrifies absolutely the entire Russian population. And that word is mobilization. Not just any mobilization. We're talking about a general mobilization.
Putin may gamble on mobilization to rescue Russia's Ukraine invasion.
And heads up, because this headline isn't an exaggeration. Russian outlet Vetska claims, citing sources inside the presidential administration itself, that factions within the security apparatus are already pushing for the order to be given. And you don't even need to rely on leaks. Just look at what the Kremlin has been doing for months now. A constant juggling act of measures to scrape up recruits from wherever it can. And the problem is, it's not working. Russia has a very serious recruitment problem. A problem that's showing up exactly where it hurts most, on the battlefield. Because so far this year, the front has been completely paralyzed. So it seems obvious, right? We're about to see a general mobilization. Well, hold on, because it's not that clear cut. A general mobilization is no small thing. It's exactly what Putin has been avoiding since day one. We already saw it in 2022, when he had no choice but to mobilize. He made sure that the move stayed limited, and that the burden fell on the empire's peripheral regions, the ones that could make the least noise. But of course, that source is drying up. And if it dries up completely, there's only one place left to look: the country's urban elite. And that means Moscow. That means St. Petersburg. That means going after the Russia that spent 4.5 years watching this war like it's a distant news broadcast. Yes, in recent months, they've started to feel it, with Ukraine's increasingly bold strikes. But with a general mobilization, they wouldn't just feel it anymore, they'd be in it. And here's the thing, we're talking about a population that is very, very tired of this damn war. In the most reliable polls, 62% favour ending the war as soon as possible, versus 28% who want to continue it. And obviously, faced with a hornet's nest like that, here at VisualPolitik we just couldn't stay quiet. So we've decided to make this video to answer 3 key questions. First, are we on the verge of a general mobilisation in Russia? And if so, when is it expected? And how might it be carried out? Second, what implications would it have on the front? And third, how are those more than 70 million Russians who just want this to end once and for all going to take it? Could this even be the beginning of the end for Putin? Well, let's find out. Alright, to answer the questions on the table, the first thing we need to do is understand exactly how paralysed the front really is. Because yes, that earlier chart already makes it pretty clear, but honestly, it doesn't fully capture just how badly things are going for the Russians. Check this out. Last July, Russia captured 455 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory, and this July, 37. Barely 37 square kilometers. That's 12 times less. Just over 1 square kilometer a day. And mind you, we're talking about the entire theatre of operations, from Sumy to Kherson, where there's more than 1,000 kilometers of contact line. Put another way, in an entire month of campaigning, an army of roughly 700,000 men captured the equivalent of Madrid's Barajas airport, and paid an absolute fortune for it. Look at the estimates from Ukraine's general staff. In July, Russia lost 42,860 men. It was the bloodiest month of all of 2026. And even if that number might be somewhat inflated, these are Ukrainian estimates. After all, the fact is that almost no source disputes the underlying reality. Russia is suffering like never before. It's losing troops at a breakneck pace. And the attrition isn't limited to personnel. 2,016 artillery systems destroyed. Almost 14,000 vehicles, an absolute record since the invasion began. And brace yourself, we're also talking about more than 54,000 drones shot down in a single month. Last July, for comparison, it was 6,000. And that's just at the front. Because meanwhile, behind the lines, Ukraine is popping Russian refineries like party balloons, logistics, infrastructure everywhere. Even dozens of Russian Amazon warehouses. The situation can be summed up in 4 words: maximum cost, maximum reward. So why is this happening? What's changed? Well, the answer is complex, and we've already gone deep into it in several videos, but broadly speaking, it comes down to 2 big factors. On one hand, Ukraine's technological capability. On the other, Russian attrition. The first big reason is a fundamental shift this war is going through. And yes, we're talking about drones. Devices that, according to various estimates, are now responsible for between 70 and 80% of all casualties at the front. But careful, we're not just talking about the drones you're picturing. We're also talking about fiber optic FPVs. Take, for example, Ukraine's Patashka drone. What makes it so special? See, a normal FPV is controlled by radio, and wherever there's a signal, electronic warfare steps in. Jammers cut the drone's communication link and bring it down before it reaches its target. Well, the fix turned out to be almost absurdly simple. Strip out the radio and attach a cable instead. These drones trail a spool with kilometers of fiber optic cable, which unspools mid-flight and keeps them tethered to the pilot. And what does that mean? That electronic warfare does absolutely nothing to them. There's no signal to jam. The first spools offered a range of 10 kilometers. Today's most advanced Ukrainian models claim 50. And of course, a weapon that's cheap, invisible, and impossible to jam multiplies on its own, to the point that today both sides are launching tens of thousands of them a month. And you know what proves it? The cables themselves. Look at what's on the screen. A frontline town literally blanketed in fiber optic cable, hanging from trees, from poles, from rooftops. Every one of those strands was once a drone hunting a target, and those webs keep getting denser because the use of these drones has intensified massively in recent months. In fact, some sources suggest it's doubled so far this year, which of course is creating a genuine death strip.
This death strip isn't a trench or a line on a map. It's a band of terrain on both sides of the front where anything that moves and gets spotted is living on borrowed time. There are drones watching around the clock. If they see you, you die. It's that simple. And the alarming part is how much it's grown. At the start of the war, that zone was about 5 kilometers. Today, it's between 20 and 25 kilometers on each side, and it's expected to reach 30 before the year is out.
Because of this, Russia's way of advancing has had to change completely. They can no longer mass men, armor, or ammunition, because the moment they do, they become far too vulnerable a target. So instead, they use infiltration groups of 1 to 3 soldiers who move through the ruins at night in hiding, trying to take positions little by little. But of course, that strip keeps getting harder to penetrate. It's bigger, and there are more drones operating inside it. And that explains a good part of why advances have slowed down so much. Now there's another variable weighing on this too, Russian army personnel. Though careful, because on this topic the sources are very muddled. Some very credible ones, like the Institute for the Study of War, say Russia is suffering more casualties than it's able to recruit, and that this is heavily grinding down personnel on the ground. But others claim the exact opposite, that they're recruiting more and more people. Who's right? It's genuinely hard to know. If we take the major estimates and put them together, Russian casualties range from 5,000 to 8,200 men a week, and recruitment between 5,500 and 8,000. So depending on how you look at it, Russia is either gaining 3,000 soldiers a week or losing 2,700. So seen that way, personnel doesn't seem like such a worrying variable for Moscow, right? Maybe they don't need any general mobilization after all. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's explain. Because what matters here isn't how many soldiers Russia has, it's whether that number keeps growing. Look, in 2024, they had just over 500,000 men deployed at the front. By late 2025, they were already nearing 700,000. Considerable growth, but that trend has stopped. So far in 2026, the number is completely stagnant. Russia has stopped accumulating troops. Now think about that for a second. In absolute terms, Russia might not be losing deployed troops or losing very few. But in relative terms, it's losing, and a lot. Why? Because remember what we just told you. Every month that passes, advancing gets harder. The death strip is wider and more impenetrable. The attrition level keeps rising. The accumulated exhaustion is getting harder to bear. And the effort required to capture each square kilometer has skyrocketed. In other words, they need far more units to shift that trend and force a breakthrough at the front. What they have now is nowhere near enough. That much is becoming clearer by the day. And yet, the Russian army, at best, hasn't grown in capacity for half a year. At worst, it may be starting to shrink. Which is why more and more analysts believe that neither in 2026 nor in 2027 will Russia manage to seize what's left of Donbass. All of this, of course, assuming we stay under the current dynamic. Bottom line, the number of deployed troops is one of the variables that could determine this war's future. Up until now, the Russians had managed to get troops fairly easily, but this year, things have stalled, while accumulated fatigue keeps growing. So why isn't it so easy for Moscow to get troops anymore? Well, stay with us. In September 2022, Putin signed Decree 647, a 10-point order that let him call up any Russian citizen with prior military experience, whether they wanted to go or not. In just over a month, that mobilized 302,503 men. But careful, they didn't come from all of Russia equally. Far from it.
If we look at recruitment per capita across the different regions of the Federation, we'll see it could hardly be more unequal. A perfect example is Buryatia, a poor republic in Russia's far east. There, they called up about 3 men out of every 100 of military age, very similar to other regions like Ryazan or even Kaliningrad. By contrast, if we look at more urban regions like Moscow itself, the story changes completely. There, they called up 1 in 200. In other words, a man from Buryatia had 6 times the odds of ending up at the front compared to someone from Moscow.
So why did they pick people from such far-flung places? Basically for 2 good reasons. First, because they were far less likely to complain. They weren't part of the country's urban elite, had no platform and no ability to organize, which made them an easy target. And second, because they're much poorer, something the Kremlin has exploited with its checkbook. And in fact, after that September 2022, Putin never mobilized again. He switched methods. Instead of forcing people, he started buying them. He started buying ordinary citizens with money, or prisoners with the promise of getting out of jail. And this isn't a minor detail. Of all the Russian dead who could be identified by name, almost 4 out of 10 were volunteers who signed a contract. Another 10% were recruited prisoners. Those mobilized in 2022 don't even reach 8%. In other words, this war is being fought mostly by people who signed a piece of paper in exchange for a bonus that, in Russia's heartland, sounds like winning the lottery. It worked wonderfully. You already saw it earlier. Russia went from just over 500,000 men at the front to nearly 700,000. And why did people sign up? Just do the maths. In Buryatia, where the average salary is around $600 a month, the bonus was equivalent to almost 3 years' salary paid up front. That bargain is running out. The people who could be bought are running out. And we know that because the price hasn't stopped climbing. Look at the escalation. In January 2024, the average regional bonus was 159,000 rubles. By December of that same year, 908,000. They multiplied it almost 6-fold in 12 months. And in March 2026, it hit an all-time high, 1,470,000 rubles. In fact, it's estimated Russia now spends more than $10 billion a year just on signing bonuses. That's just the upfront bonus, not counting salaries or compensation. And here's the important part. Even so, it's not enough. Because in the first quarter of 2026, with the highest bonuses of the entire war on the table, recruitment hit its lowest point in 3 years. Barely around 70,000 contracts between January and March, 20% less than the year before. Record prices and a record low in sign-ups, all while more men than ever are being lost at the front, which explains headlines like this one.
Putin's war machine scours the home front for recruits. Moscow turns to raids, pressure, and deception to enlist soldiers to fight against Ukraine.
Raids, pressure, and deception. Something was certainly happening before and has now intensified for a very simple reason. They can't keep up. So basically, Putin's army has a very serious personnel problem, and the worst part isn't the present. The worst part is where it's headed. Because it's going to get harder and harder to attract people, right when they're going to need more and more of them. So what's the way out? There are only 2. Either sit down and negotiate to end the war, or find recruits by whatever means necessary. And so far, Putin hasn't shown a single sign of wanting to sit down. So only the second option remains. And that pressure is already trickling down the entire chain of command. From the Kremlin to the governors, from the governors to the military commissariats, and from there onto the streets. Notice what a Novosibirsk regional government official told Vetska.
We have one of the lowest contract signing numbers in the whole country. They've made it clear that if we don't hit the required figures by August, something harsh is coming. What? I don't know.
And as you're all probably thinking, something harsh sounds a lot like general mobilization. But careful, because this is a card Putin doesn't want to play, and one he'll try everything to avoid playing. But the reality is he's almost run out of places to squeeze, and whatever he manages to scrape together at this point is going to be more of a patch than a real solution. So it all points to the same conclusion conclusion. If Putin wants to take what's left of Donbass, he's going to have to announce a general mobilization, or, well, some kind of broad, generalized mobilization. Which brings us straight to the first question we posed at the start. Can he actually do it? Well, the short answer is yes. He can. And not only can he, the decision rests entirely and exclusively with him, because it's worth remembering how Russia actually works. Putin doesn't have to convince a parliament, negotiate with a coalition, or go through any court. He's the sole ruler of the country. If he wants to do something, there's absolutely no one who can stop him. In fact, that's exactly how it played out in 2022. The partial mobilization was prepared in the strictest secrecy, and the decision was made personally by Putin together with the top brass of the Ministry of Defense and the General Staff. But beyond that, the legal groundwork is already in place. And there are two things here that don't always get talked about. First, under Russian law, there's no difference at all between partial and general mobilization. None. This law doesn't define either one. And the second is even bigger. Remember Decree 647, the one Putin signed in September 2022? Well, that decree has never been repealed. It's still in force. Yes, Putin declared the mobilization complete on October 28th of that year, but that was a verbal statement in front of the cameras. It wasn't a legal act. There's no decree formally ending it. And in case there was any doubt, in May 2023, Russia's own Supreme Court confirmed that Decree 647 remains formally in effect. And do you know what that means? That to mobilize again, Putin doesn't need to sign anything at all. All he has to do is stop saying it's over. So the question is when he'll stop saying that. And there's fairly broad consensus among analysts after the Duma elections. This September on the 18th, 19th and 20th, Russia holds legislative elections. Voters will elect the 450 seats of the State Duma, plus the parliaments of 39 regions and about a dozen governors. All of it, of course, in a context of thoroughly rigged elections. But even though the outcome is a foregone conclusion, these elections set the calendar, because Putin has a very consistent habit. Decisions that cause pain are always made after people vote. Never before. And you already know the best example because we just told you about it. On September 11th, 2022, Russians voted in more than 20 regions and United Russia won everywhere. 10 days later, on September 21st, Putin signed the partial mobilization decree. And there are several more examples just like it. So everything suggests that if it happens, that mobilization would come after the elections. Now then, could it actually change the dynamics of the war? Well, let's assume Putin announces general recruitment. The first question is what troop target he'd put on the table. In 2022, it was 300,000. And note that of those 300,000, only about 150,000 actually became organized, usable units. The rest was lost along the way. For this autumn, rumors put the number at 500,000, though that figure came from a Ukrainian body and hasn't been independently confirmed. But the number isn't even the main problem. The problem is the timing, because mobilizing isn't like turning on a tap. You have to locate people, summon them, equip them, and train them, and that takes months. And here's the important part, because even so, analysts don't believe Russia would achieve the breakthrough at the front that it needs. And the reason is exactly what we told you earlier. No matter how many men you throw in, the death strip is still there, and it's still impossible to mass enough forces to pull off a large-scale offensive. Add to that the genuine web of Ukrainian fortifications, and there's your answer. More men would mean more progress, but not fast progress. Progress like what we've seen over the last 2 years, drip by drip. And that's assuming the Ukrainians don't keep improving their technological and military production capabilities, which lately they've gotten us pretty used to. On top of that, mobilization would carry an enormous economic cost, because Russia is already dragging around a very serious labor shortage. So serious that Elvira Nabiullina, governor of the central bank, and the woman holding up Russia's war economy, said so in April with a bluntness that, coming from a technocrat, amounts to a scream.
We have never until now in the history of modern Russia lived with such a deficit of labor force. Never had this. And it affects the entire economic situation.
And there's the key point. Mobilization doesn't create men. It just moves them around. It pulls them out of factories and puts them in trenches. But careful, because the economy wouldn't only weaken from that, also from what would follow, a genuine brain drain. Because when Putin signed that decree in 2022, Russia emptied out. At least 650,000 Russians who left back then are still outside the country today. and with a devastating profile. Around 80% with university degrees, between 20 and 40 years old, from the tech and science sectors. If there's a second mobilization, that would happen again, no doubt about it. The Kremlin knows it, and that's why it spent months closing the door. An automatic travel ban the moment your summons arrives, and not a single multiple entry Schengen visa issued since November 2025. Sure, they can make it extremely difficult, but people are going to want to leave anyway, and one way or another, they'll manage it. And this is exactly where you can see the underlying problem with mobilization, because it would break the social status quo this war rests on, an unwritten pact that says the war is fought by other people. It's fought by prisoners, by the poor from remote republics, and by immigrants. And you living in Moscow won't be touched, and breaking that could stir up serious trouble.
Any attempt to conscript large numbers of Russians would shatter this unspoken social contract and could potentially destabilize the home front.
And it just so happens that the people who'd be swept up in this mobilization are the very ones most supportive of the war, something that would change the moment the weight landed on them. Remember that support chart from earlier? Well, zoom in and things get interesting. Across Russia as a whole, only 28% want the war to continue, but in Moscow, it's nearly 49%, almost half. In other words, the Russians most enthusiastic about this war are exactly the ones living in the city that sends the fewest sons to the front. And you don't have to speculate about what would happen if that changed, because it already happened once. In August 2022, before the partial mobilization, 48% of Russians wanted the war to continue. A month after the decree, that had dropped to 36%. And that was a mobilization that carefully avoided the big cities. Now be careful, because there's a huge difference between 2022 and today. Putin's repressive apparatus has grown enormously. Russia's National Guard, the Rosgvardia, now has around 400,000 troops, and for the first time has been equipped with tanks, self-propelled artillery, and multiple rocket launchers. This past February, Putin even created his own general staff for it, and its budget keeps climbing. Bottom line, Putin's beloved special operation is getting more and more complicated. The front is essentially frozen, and the recruitment tap is closing on him. So if he really wants to keep going, he's going to have to make a risky move. And yes, he's spent time preparing to tie up loose ends so things don't spiral out of control. But no matter how well prepared he is, it's still a risk the Tsar will have to take. And that's exactly why his decision will be so revealing. Because it won't just tell us how many soldiers he's sending to the front, it'll tell us where he really stands, and how he actually sees this war. If he mobilizes, the message is crystal clear. He's willing to go very far in Ukraine, and to pay a domestic price he spent 4.5 years avoiding. And if he doesn't mobilize, if he keeps scraping recruits together from here and there, the message is exactly the opposite. More optimistic, sure, but that's nowhere near saying this war is about to end. At most, it means Putin can no longer win it by force. Either way, the coming months are going to be crucial, and if he does ultimately decide to mobilize, then only one question will remain. Did he manage to tie up the loose ends well enough? So what do you think? Leave us your opinion down in the comments. And if you liked the video, you know what to do. Hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.